Hello, my name is Patience Segovia, and this is my persuasive speech on life sentences for capital punishment better deteriorate capital crimes and halt increased ramifications for the death penalty. Basically, the death penalty is wrong and should be abolished. Death penalties harms not only the convicts falsely accused, but also does not fight capital crime rates. Life sentences for capital punishment better deteriorate capital crimes and halt increased ramifications for death penalty. I recently had my car stolen. That simple loss has derailed my whole world. Crimes are still happening in our backyard, in our daily lives, and in the federal system as well. Trusting in the leaders, but not checking up on them prevents hand-on movements and change to fix the crime in our nation as a member of the society that we are a part of. Anyone can be a victim of crime, keep themselves safe by preventing actions and hands-on movements to help fix our system and better it. The speech will go over the problems with the death penalty, following into the solutions and those preventive measures that you can do to help. Concluding, I will relay the benefits of fixing our system one step at a time. Before we fix anything, we need to understand the problem. What is the death penalty, and what are the implications of the death penalty? In the United States, some still use the death penalty. The U.S. uses the death penalty today between 1976 and January 1st to 2017, with about 1,442 executions in the U.S. 3 were held by firing squad, 3 by hanging, 11 by gas inhalation, and 158 by electrocution, and 1,267 by lethal injection. Quote, "There are 31 states in the U.S. where the death penalty is legally upheld, exercised by the federal government. The U.S. is the only Western nation that currently applies the capital punishment and is one of the 57 countries in the world that uses the punishment. The country was also the first to establish the lethal injection as an execution method. From 1976, more than 7,800 prisoners have been given the death sentence, 1,400 of whom have been executed. More than 2,900 are still on death row, while 159 were exonerated before their execution. Capital punishment is applied for the crime of murder that comprises of aggravated factors such as robbery, multiple victims, or rape. Depending on the state, one can have a sentence of death penalty if they have committed aggravated murder or crimes against the state. However, aggravating factors for seeking the death penalty can vary among the 31 states where the capital punishment is legal. From 1976, the number of executions rose as a near continuous pace, peaking at 98 in 1999." End quote. This is from the States with Death Penalty World Atlas by Benjamin Saw. Those convicted also have a hand in police shootings. The death penalty is costly, ethically and economically. Since the death penalty cannot be retracted if wrongfully executed or prosecuted, it costs more. Quote, "The death penalty is significantly more expensive than condemning a person to die in prison. Simple housing prisoners on death row costs California taxpayers an additional $90,000 per prisoner per year, above what it is cost to house them with the general prison population, which adds up to $59 million a year. The price tag for California's new death row rates is $336 million. All of those costs would be avoided if the people on death row were sentenced to die in prison and moved into the general population. Viewed another way, we spend $250 million to carry out the sentences of the 11 prisoners executed between 1977 and 2002. End quote. The truth about life without parole condemned to die in prison. Quote, "The death penalty costs more, delivers less, and puts innocent lives at risk." End quote. And then the same source I used before. "The resources used for the death penalty are causing lack of resources to catch more killers and criminals." In 2017, quote, "The nation saw a 2.2% decline in crime across the country than the crime rates from 2016. However, this is not as good of news as it sounds as face value. Even with this decrease, there are still over 17,000 murderers in the country, approximately 5.3 per 100,000 people." End quote. Crime rate by state, 2021. There is also a racial bias in the death penalty. Those of color tend to be more likely to be prosecuted to the death row sentence. Quote, the ratio by half of all murder victims are white, but 80% of capital trials involve white victims. Since 1976, 21 white defendants with black victims have been executed compared to 297 black defendants whose victims were white. End quote. Natalia Baptiste, our license is a merciful alternative to death penalty. We have identified the problem. The solution is simply removing the death penalty and putting life sentences in its place. There is more than one way to seek justice. Life sentences are very uncomfortable physically and mentally and emotionally, and with lack of health care can be painful for the aging process as they continue out their sentence. Quote, prisoners condemned to die in prison are not given any special treatment, and in fact, they have less access to programs than other prisoners. They are housed in high-security facilities with few privileges, far away from any relatives, and in crowded group cells. Ironically, people on death row are provided much more comfortable single cells and sometimes gain celebrity and attention just by being there. End quote. The truth about life without parole provides a more practical purpose for criminals when sentenced for a multiple life sentence. For example, let's say that there's one with parole and a criminal without parole. Quote, to take a situation involving these possibilities of parole, the jury convicts him of both. The judge sentences him to a consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole. State law allows the defendant to apply for parole after 20 years. By sentencing the defendant to consecutive sentences, the judge is likely ensured that he will be behind bars for at least 40 years. Now let's say the defendant received consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Here, the defendant appeals the convictions and court overturns one because the prosecution didn't comply with its discovery obligations. That takes one life sentence off the books, at least until the defendant can be retired. But the other license still remains in effect. End quote. Maka Schwartzbach, attorney, why do judges hand out multiple life sentences? The fact is that life sentences are more brutal and they are better punishment and they don't kill people because it's wrong. More resources can be also put into catching other criminals. Quote, life without parole provides swift, severe, and certain punishment. It provides justice to survivors of the murder victims and allows more resources to be invested into solving other murderers and preventing violence. Sentencing people to die in prison is the sensible alternative for public safety and murder victims' families. End quote. The truth about life without parole. I have explained the benefits of life sentences instead of the death penalty. Now let us imagine if we all agreed to this as a nation. What would our nation be like with a more universal capital punishment? All capital offenders are less likely to be released and not placed in a way where they can never be wrongfully accused or convicted if they are found innocent later on. Programs in place can also be used for the labor of the society for those prisoners, such as, for example, a program where they help train animals to help better society and for their own mental and physical health, as well as better behavior status. And then more tax dollars are going towards other matters to affect our day-to-day lives, like fixing our city walks, roads, and all that stuff, but even more importantly, catching other criminals. Let's review a little bit before we conclude. This speech went over the problems with the death penalty, the solutions that those preventive measures with a license in its place for capital punishment. Finally, I introduced another world with one more problem fixed in our system. One step at a time, we can solve this problem. And here's how you can do it. Sign petitions for change, vote for the abolishment of the death penalty in your state, and contact your local politicians to provide support and resources for your movement. And number one of all, talk about it. The number one thing you can do is educate people. Education is always the first step to making a change in the right direction. People put in dangerous position against their doing and possibly harming from is a huge concern. Preventing capital crime is even more important and a root issue for the capital punishments to be wrong. It is important to help those incarcerated to be free how they need, also to help yourself and your loved ones from being put in at least one more danger. Thank you for your time and have a good day.